Sir, we are live now. With all your permission, I'm starting this session for today.
Go ahead.
A very good evening, all the participants. I welcome all the participants on today's session. Let's welcome today's speaker with great honor, none other than Professor Dr. Abdul Hamid Zargar, sir. And let me share some of the achievement of the sir. Sir has done MBBS, MD, DM in endocrinology, senior consultant at the Department of Endocrinology at Center for Diabetes and Endocrine Care, National Highway, Gulshan Nagar, Srinagar, Jammu and Kashmir. And today he is going to discuss on a topic iodine deficiency in India, prevalence, consequences, and rewards of iodinization. By taking not much time, I would like to invite sir and hand over this session to sir. Over to you, sir. Kindly.
Have a very good evening, dear friends. And Faraz, thank you so much for your affectionate introduction. In the next 30-40 minutes, I will talk to you about an issue that has been quite dear to me, apart from being a global and national issue. That is iodine deficiency. Most of us you have been talking about iron deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, protein deficiency. But the common physician and common clinician usually does not encounter a talk on iodine deficiency. When I started my endocrinology in the early 80s, this probably used to be the number one public health problem globally in general and in our country in particular. Just to emphasize the epidemiology of this disease, this was a disorder that would just not afflict an individual or a family. This would affect the whole communities. So it is extremely important to understand that when we are talking about iodine deficiency, we are not talking about individuals. We are talking about communities. We are talking about nations. We are talking about continents where problems occur because of this. And mankind did not understand for long. One, the metabolism of iodine. Second, the need of iodine in the body. Third, the magnitude of deficiency of this iodine in our diet, in our food, in our environment that was essential for our growth and development. And that growth and development, not only physical growth, but intellectual growth, sexual growth, reproductive growth. And this would impact literally every cell in the body. Once we look back, I can say with a lot of pride and enthusiasm, some of the best work in the field of understanding the impact of iodine deficiency and how to correct it came from our own country. And this is the man who was pivotal in right from the conceptualization, quantitation, and implementation of the strategies that would eliminate iodine deficiency from our country. Professor V. Ramalingasamy, in his younger days, was a professor and head department of pathology at the prestigious All Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. And then he retired as a director of that prestigious institute. And then government made him a director general of Indian Council of Medical Research. But he spent all his life, even after his retirement, he died at age of 80s, you can see it. He continued to work for eradication of iodine deficiency globally and nationally. Right from concept, what it is. Second, quantifying it, how bad it is. Third, what do we do about it? And when he found the strategy, implemented that strategy and found in his lifetime the fruits of that. This is a picture of 50s, 60s, and 70s of so-called Himalayan goiter. It had become a very famous word in internal medicine, community medicine and endocrinology in 50s and 60s, Himalayan goiter. You look at their neck. You look at these three residents of Manali. All of them having significant thyroid enlargement. In fact, the two on your left side, the central and you can see huge nodularity even from this picture. And this nodularity would mean that the thyroid has been sick for a long, long time. And that was a scenario which people like Professor Ramalingasamy and his colleagues observed. And in the whole Kangra Valley in Himachal Pradesh, this group of scientists started their studies in 1956 and continued for a decade and a half, 16 years, where they studied 1 million school children, quantified how many of them had visible. Those were the times where ultrasounds couldn't be done. You had to examine the neck, you had to find the thyromegaly, nodularity, any sign of hypothyroidism, and then quantify what percentage of people had goiter in the valley. And then, in order to correlate it with iodine, estimate their iodine. And usually, this iodine estimation is a relatively difficult thing to do because you have to estimate it in urine in all these regions. But they did it. And when they quantified this, that it was a huge problem, 2/3 or more people had this enlarged thyroid in these school children that I alluded to, these 1 million kids. Urinary iodine was low, their iodine estimation was done. And then in the same region where they had done this epidemiological study and found iodine was very low. Non-iodized salt in those areas in Kangra Valley was banned. And only iodized salt was distributed through government shops. The way we get this ration, rice, wheat, kerosene oil from these ration shops, government distribution system, civil supplies. In a similar fashion, iodized salt was distributed, particularly because it was an experimental stage, 56 to 1972. That time, they would regularly go and check whether people were getting iodized salt or not. And then, they were seeing every year what was happening to urinary iodine, what was happening to goiters. And they ensured that this salt was priced competitively with the non-iodized salt, because otherwise, if the salt was costlier, people in that area were relatively lower middle class or rather poor. So then they would resent. So it had to be cost effective. And then they found out a generational change, how these goiters started coming down. And they then etiologically linked this iodine deficiency with this thyroid enlargement. At that given time, many people globally were working on this in different regions of the world. Professor Corredo was a guy who had done a lot of work on goiters in Europe, particularly in Holland. John Stanbury was a guy who had worked a lot on iodine. In fact, he was the first person who identified iodine in thyroid in 1953. And he had retired as a professor emeritus of medicine from Harvard Medical School. Dr. Hazel from Adelaide has done a lot of studies in Africa. And the way Ramalingasamy and his colleagues, Dr. M.M. Asahuja, Dr. Kuchiplai, supplemented iodine through salt. In many areas, Hazel gave people iodized iodine in oil, injectable, where, supplies could not be given in, at least in pregnant ladies, make them iodine sufficient so that they give birth to normal IQ babies. And Ramalinga Swami continued this work till he was alive. And simultaneously and subsequently, Professor Ahuja and Kuchiplai carried on to this. Now, while they were doing this, most of these workers and others with them realized that taking care of this iodine is not only a matter of taking care of this goiter. There is a huge range of disorders that people seem to suffer in areas which are iodine deficient. And when we restore iodine sufficiency, that range of disorders progressively dwindles. And this range of disorders was known as iodine deficiency disorders. Not just a goiter. This refers to the ill effects of iodine deficiency in a population that can be prevented if we give them adequate iodine. In fact, in 1984, World Health Organization organized a meeting of the researchers in Iodine Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, on how thyroxine, iodine thyroxine, and brain are connected. And this meeting happened at that time. I was in Iodine Institute, it was February 1984. 4 decades back, and these all stalwarts were there who were very desperate that there are many regions of the world where not only goiter is increased, where not only the height is truncated, but the IQ has become limited because of this iodine deficiency. And they adopted this term iodine deficiency disorders. And in the August issue of Lancet 1984, this came as a Delhi declaration from the proceedings of that meeting that took place in Feb 1984 in All Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. Now, in summary, apart from looking at this neck, which we call today as goiter, what else would this iodine deficiency do? In those areas where iodine was not sufficient in food, cretinism would occur more frequently, which would be a mental deficiency, short stature, idiocy, right from birth. Women will have spontaneous abortions, stillbirths, and birth defects. There'll be neurological disorders. In fact, there was a province of China which had many neurological disorders, psychomotor defects, upper motor neuron type of lesions, spastic paraparesis, and which got totally eliminated by supplying iodine in water supply of that area. And those all neurological disorders that had been happening in that particular region for ages were eliminated in one generation. And on an average, 13 IQ points are lost in kids who are born in areas where food is iodine deficient. And this is the leading cause of mental handicap, which is preventable, totally preventable. Now, if you look at, when you look at a guy like this who is a mental retard, mentally challenged, physically challenged, when 1% of population has cretinism, 5% have some significant brain damage, and 30% are totally lethargic and incapable of properly comprehending the ways of life. So many times not even educable. Now, if this percentage of criticism goes to 10, which in many areas was quite common in the whole of Northeast, right from Kashmir, Himalayas up to Northeast, which was true in my younger days, probably whole population would have some form of a suboptimal mental development. And that was a huge intellectual and national disaster that a big chunk of population, right from the birth from this environmental disease, would not be able to exploit their genetic potential intellectually or otherwise. And that's what was a major. See, today's generation would not realize this pain that our generation had at that given time, what was happening nationally. This is a beautiful picture that came from some of the work from that Hazel from Adelaide. Iodine deficiency and causing spastic paraparesis, preventable mental retardation and brain damage. It's a picture from 1984. And look at this data. This is a mother, the elder one, huge goiter all around. And the kid is totally cretinoid. But you can see that apathetic look on mother also. But the baby is total cretin. And this wasn't that uncommon in many parts of our country before iodization program was fully implemented. Look at this family from Congo. These three females and that male, same age. And these are mixed cretinous, fundamentally because they were exposed to, they did not have an adequate iodine right from the intrauterine life. And they can never be normal. You may treat their myxedema. We can treat their hypothyroidism. But we cannot reverse their mental prowess, intellectual development. Generation is lost to this. This is a study that we conducted in early 90s in Kashmir, and throughout Kashmir, in 202 villages, towns, this is the data that was published in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 1995, but the whole study spread over 5 years, where we examined 5,000 kids from different parts of the valley, and we found out that 45% of them had an abnormal thyroid. Imagine now the impact of this on the mental development. Then we quantified their urinary iodine from village to village, and it just exactly matched the prevalence of goiter in those communities. If in particular area, goiter prevalence was 60%, and in another area, goiter prevalence was 30%, urinary iodine content was twice better in people who had 30% than where it was 60%. Correlating etologically the two of them. And this is what used to be the norm then. This is a rock salt. And many people have been consuming this for a long time. And in fact, in North India, this was a taboo. And that rock salt has some healing impact. Generations have been using it. But this never contained any iodine. And slowly and steadily, after getting this information, we started educating the healthcare workers. We educated the government. We educated the shopkeepers. They should slowly, and that time, iodized salt, quality iodized salt also was not that adequately available. But we created an awareness at the national level. And not only created awareness, but also created the market for iodized salt because it was a national emergency. And slowly and steadily, this rock salt use became scant. Now, we also followed the same pattern what was followed in Himalayan goiter. I went to the government and we got a ban on non-iodized salt in Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, we had been one of the first states which had banned non-iodized salt in 1976, but it was never implemented till 1969 in letter and spirit. I went to the government issued, and Governor of Jammu and Kashmir issued a SRO and made it mandatory that only iodized salt should be distributed. We kept on talking about it through the media. Government kept on talking about it. We were at it for a long, long time. We went to the schools where we studied these children. We went to the hospital. We went to the distribution areas. We went to the major salt traders and educated them why it is important to use only iodized salt. We use the religionists. And this is 2 decades later. This is a paper that we published in Clinical Endocrinology in 2014, where we looked at the goiter again, we looked at urinary iodine excretion again, and we looked at the same number of people, the same areas, and same age group. So, like, when we found out 5 to 15 years was 45% goiter, iodine was like this. Now we took a new set of youngsters who had been exposed to iodine, iodized salt. Again, these thousands of kids, the same areas, we repeat the same procedure. One, looking at the goiter prevalence. Two, looking at the urinary iodine and trying to find out have we made a difference. First thing we found out that goiter prevalence had steeply gone down. So you remember that the initial study, it was 45%. It was now 4 to 6%. So from 45%, it was a major drop. But this is an actual quantification. On the left-hand side, the mean urinary iodine from all the areas was a 1995 study, which was published in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, was 49.6 micrograms per gram of creatinine. This was almost tripled by the year 2011, 123. And goiter prevalence, which was 45 microgram, 45% in 95, it had come down to 4%. So again, etiologically linking the two and then seeing what are the societal benefits. In many parts of our country, as I told you, some of the first studies came from Kangra Valley, Himachal Pradesh. In fact, that famous Himalayan goiter. This is a paper that was published in European Journal of Clinical Nutrition a decade back, where about 2,000 kids were again estimated after years. And because, my dear friends and colleagues, it's important to realize in most of the areas, the iodine comes in food. But that any soil that is rich in iodine, the food grown in that also will have good quantity of iodine. And any soil which is iodine deficient will continue to be iodine deficient because we are not giving some new supplies of iodine to earth. So the point is, once an iodine deficient area, always an iodine deficient area. Because these are, Himalayas, right from Kashmir to upper reaches of UP, Bihar, up to northeast, Assam, Meghalaya, all those areas. Torrential rains have deprived the higher reaches of its iodine, which has gone down the waters through the streams, the rivers to sea. So the basic soil's iodine over centuries has been depleted. And that's what has led to this gross iodine deficiency in the whole society. So the point in this study fundamentally was, if in pilot studies iodine deficiency had been contained in Himachal Pradesh in certain areas, how was the situation half a century later? And they found out that yes, the whole area was in a transition state. Goiter prevalence was slightly higher still. It means still some people had either one, tendency to use non-iodized salt, two, or the salt that was supplied and supposed to be iodized salt probably was not qualitatively as good. So it's not only that you take a so-called iodized salt where iodized salt is written. The iodine needs to be within that salt. You know that even with medication, sometimes we have a problem of quality. So in a similar fashion, we could have a problem with the quality of the iodization. So it needs to be perpetually monitored. It's not that we did it and it is gone. If we relax for a generation or two, it will come back. So that part has to be understood. This is what this study was trying to say. There have been people, there has been a iodine deficiency eradication cell in the health ministry for a long time. And they have been reviewing the data and looking back from the history that how long we have been suffering from iodine deficiency. And the data suggests that this has been there for a pretty long time, probably from thousands of years, at least in certain areas. And now that we are aware of it, now we know what are the strategies that we need to put in place to take care of it. And we also know at any time we relax on that, iodine deficiency disorders will bounce back. So we need to, from time to time, keep a tab on it. There have been global programs. There is a global organization known as International Commission for Control of Iodine Deficiency. And this has been looking globally at what governments are doing on eradicating iodine deficiency. To what extent it has been eliminated or contained. To what extent it keeps on monitoring that it doesn't resurface. And because now the current data shows more than 2 billion people potentially can be exposed to iodine deficiency and brain damage if we do not keep a constant vigilance on this. Not only getting iodized salt, but getting a quality iodized salt. Neither overdoing it, not underdoing it. And this commission takes, it has hundreds of professionals globally looking at it, collecting data, reviewing data. Because even in the Western world, in Europe in particular, where there are areas where there are huge winters, where there are Alps, where there has been a chelation of the soil of iodine for millennia, there is a tendency that sometimes it resurfaces in pockets where people have food fads or quality iodine in whatever form people take that iodine is not available. Now, probably the most important thing is, association of maternal iodine status with the fetal mental development. That's what used to be the major concern. And in fact, in my younger days, we used to have a protocols how to give mothers iodine. And we used to get that colossal iodine, a drop of it in 250 ml of water and giving that 250 ml to 4 women, 2 monthly, 3 monthly. There used to be a definitive protocol. And this meta-analysis, which was published in Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism a few years back, had data from Netherlands, had data from Spain, had data from United Kingdom, where women had been enrolled for the study to look at how their fetus after delivery develop. You see, you have a horde of mothers who have been having adequate iodine in an area where previously there was iodine deficiency. Now they give birth to kids, and then you see how they are doing at school, how their height is doing, how their puberty is doing. So when you look at it, when they get into the school and thereafter, so you know how their IQ has changed over a period of time. And in those areas where that had not happened in comparison, or what had happened. And after a huge analytical for a long time, this meta-analysis of many studies, the data aggregated together show that fetal development is vulnerable to mild to moderate iodine deficiency, particularly in the first trimester. Means even if there is a shorter period of iodine deficiency, it will impact the fetal development, even if later on you supplement it. So again, the way we say, when a mother conceives, her hemoglobin should be good, her protein should be good, her blood pressure should be normal, her sugar should be normal, her thyroid should be normal. In a similar fashion, her iodine status also needs to be normal. We don't have to do much about it. We only have to make sure the family where this girl is expecting to get pregnant uses iodized salt. It's very simple. Like we otherwise also do. What is likely to happen? That no extra money on this, no extra precaution on this. Only that this is now by and large happening in most of the areas. But in my younger days, it wouldn't happen. There have been some problems associated with excess of iodine. Now, many times, as I told you, looking at the quality of the product, you see, like iodized salt. When at times the amount of iodine that we want it to contain might be less, so iodine deficiency will resurface. But in certain areas, it might be even more. And that also has its own issues. And that can precipitate thyrotoxicosis, that can reinforce hypothyroidism, that can create a more autoimmune thyroid disease, and particularly in those people who have developed an underlying thyroid nodule, and that might become autonomous and toxic multinodular goiter if excess iodine is given. If somebody has an underlying autoimmune disease of the thyroid and now give us more than normal amount of thyroxine, if they have an underlying tendency to have a Graves' hyperthyroidism or toxic multinodular goiter, now this becomes to the fore. Again, reinforcing the fact that quality and quantity of iodine in a particular amount of salt needs to be regularly monitored. And there are mechanisms and there are departments meant to do it. Look at these two girls whom I saw long back. Look at that goiter and cretinoid face. These are almost 20, 21-year-old girls. Now, this huge goiter, surgically you can get rid of it. The right one is, on the right one, you can see the other patient which is operated. She also had such a huge goiter. The goiter has been taken care of. But look at that vacant eye. That mental retardation now cannot be taken care of. Even if, we give iodized salt, we give proper thyroxine if they have hypothyroidism, we treat any thyroid dysfunction that might have ensued. But it's just not that matter of removing that thyroid. That neurological damage already done. The somatic height already compromised. Reproductive health already compromised. So one need not wait for such a long time so that these disasters come. Gratefully, over the last 3 decades, they have progressively become lesser and lesser. We have hardly seen a cretin in the last 2 decades. And whenever we have seen, most of the times people will be diagnosed very early. And invariably, those cretins would not be a consequence of iodine deficiency. They would invariably be either thyroid wasn't properly developed, genetic non-development of thyroid, or an ectopic thyroid which has been erroneously removed. I've seen quite a few people who had an ectopic thyroid on the posterior part of the tongue. And people just removed it, thinking there's some lesion there, some tumor there, and later came to know that there was no thyroid tissue in its proper place, in ectopic place. But those mass level keratinoids have almost vanished from everywhere. So, and this is what iodine deficiency was like, and this is where we have. So many times, why it's important to keep on looking at it. Many clinicians lose the perspective because sometimes we start underestimating iodine because many clinicians of the current generation would not have seen all this. And it wouldn't, see, if they do not keep a visual, they would be undoing the good work of lots of people over the last half a century. And that is not advisable because it will be a societal calamity that if we do that. So, in conclusion, I would say thyroid hormone is essential for total body's metabolism, somatic growth, reproductive growth, neurological development. Many people believe that iodine might be directly impacting certain parts of the central nervous system in its developmental stage. That's why if you have an iodine deficiency, even in the first decade, there might be a truncation of the IQ later in the life. And we know when iodine, see, iodine is also essential for the manufacture of the thyroxine. And if one of the vital nutrients is missing, thyroid hormone cannot be made available in the quantity that is optimal for the body's requirements. So at critical stages, iodine deficiency will lead to thyroid hormone deficiency and cause many irreversible damage to different systems of the body. So it is extremely important that we put strategy in place to prevent this deficiency from recurring. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful Kashmir in winter. It's a snow-clad road leading from Baramulla to Srinagar. Any questions or comments for us? I'm here.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving out your valuable time and sharing your knowledge on this topic. I definitely think this session knowledge is going to help all the participants on their practice also. Sir, I can see we have received some question from the participant. If you allow, can I take this question with all your permission?
Oh, please go ahead.
The first question is from Dr. Agarwal. He's asking what ongoing research is exploring new interventions or technologies to address iodine deficiency.
Even, first, simple things. One of the first things, not the technology, but from the community and society point of view, in all those areas which had been documented to be iodine deficient, every 10 years, 15 years, surveys are done that iodine deficiency has not resurfaced. Secondly, a proper monitoring of technology which is used to iodize salt is improving. I'll tell you a personal episode, Dr. Agarwal. 2 decades back, there was a group of traders from Gujarat who were visiting Kashmir as tourists. And one day, Director of Health Services of the Kashmir called me and said that I have invited these salt traders for a lunch. And you have been talking so much about iodine deficiency to us. I also invite you for a lunch with them and also discuss with them about the iodization. When we discussed this iodization program, national program, local programs, Government of India's intervention, they were all youngsters, and most of them said that their families have been in trade business for generations. See, from Gujarat, Kutch area, a lot of industries are working on iodized salt in general from the previous time. There are generations of families who have been busy in that business. And these younger generations have seen this. And they said this is the first time somebody has explained to us how important our job is from the national developmental perspective. And then I told them, there are now new technologies have come in where exact quantification of the iodine is done. And not only that, you have a salt A, you are supposed to add to it an X amount of iodine. And now, how to precisely make it, the technology has improved. And newer methods have improved, newer analytical methods have improved. But more importantly, monitoring methods, once it is done, randomly picking up a packet and checking, the technology of monitoring has improved. That and almost, all those good corporate houses who are responsible, producers, from every batch they send a one to quality control where the new technology improve. In a jiffy, they will tell us what is the quantity of. You see, plus minus 8% of iodine is supposed to be okay. If you're supposed to have 100 macrograms, if it is 92, it's okay. If it's 108, it's okay. But if it is instead of 100, it is 50 only, it's not okay. If instead of 100, it is 150, again, that's not okay. So technology and refining, the process of iodizing the salt has gone a sea change in the last 30, 40 years. And people are at it. See, the way, loom factories were there. Now they are on, people used to do that, creating the cloth. And now you do electricity. Now you don't need so many people. You need, so in a similar fashion, many things have happened in this area also. And that continuous improvisation is on for us.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing insight on this question. Moving forward, another question is from Mr. Manish. He is asking, are there irreversible neurological consequences if iodine deficiency is not addressed promptly?
Absolutely. Manish, once neurological development is poor during intrauterine life, it is literally impossible to correct it. I'll tell you otherwise also. Now look at it the other way around. This will tell you how important this whole thing is, not from that treating a patient, but from a national perspective. You imagine now the whole nation's IQ going down by 10%. You know what loss that is? What criminality it is, or 20%. And that's sort of a thing that terrified us in 80s. That's why, we have been at it. There was a continental study in United States and Europe. Now, this is very important to understand it. This happened 2 decades back. What they did, women get admitted to the hospital. But I'm talking about the Western world, not of India. They get admitted and then samples are taken. Do a CBC, do a blood sugar, do a thyroid function next, do this, do that, do calcium, do somebody cesarean, somebody normal. And many times samples are preserved, maternal samples are preserved if something needs to be done in future, right? Now these kids are born, lady is discharged. So what these researchers did, they found out these blood samples which had been there for decades. They reanalyzed their free T4 and TSH. Now imagine now you have a 1 lakh kids who have been born 20 years back, 15 years back, and you have a blood sample of their mothers when they were delivered. Now, on the one hand, you are looking at their mothers' free T4 and TSH when these kids were born. And on the other hand, you are looking at their school performance. Now, this is an iodine sufficient state now. School performance, education, because now they have moved on with life. They found out even if TSH was upper quarter of normal, their IQ points in those children would be lesser than those whose TSH was on the lower norm. It means TSH was on the higher side. There was a disadvantage so long as IQ was concerned. And that's why those new criteria came up that keep TSH on the lower side during pregnancy to give the best benefit to the mental maturation. Now, Manish, now if there is an overt iodine deficiency, if there is overt hypothyroidism, the damage would be huge. It will not be just pure. See, somebody had supposed to have an IQ of 110, it becomes 100. Somebody have 130, it was. But here there will be hardly anything left, and this is irreversible. And that's why caution. See, when a mother is when somebody is pregnant, that period is a very precious period. How do you create that baby as a clinician, as a doctor? Because many things may not be reversible then. We need to give an optimal chance to that fetus to develop the best what the genetics and environment can dictate for them. I told you, if you have a milder deficiency, somebody getting a distinction in the class, somebody just passing, we will not miss much. But then we say, if this somebody just passing or sometime passing, somebody failing, if he had been iodine sufficient in intrauterine life, he would also have been a distinction holder. At societal level, we miss it. So that's why it's extremely important. Very important question. Over to Faraz.
Thank you so much, sir, for explaining it once again really well. As I can see, sir, there is no more question from the participant end. Sir, as there is no more questions, sir, with all your permission, shall we conclude this session for today?
Sure. God bless you. A very good evening.
Thank you so much, sir. Take care of yourself. Hope to see you again in future also with new topics, sir. Bye,
Sure.
sir.
Sure. Always there